Hey everyone, Kevin from mechanicaladvantage.com. If you are watching this on Tuesday, November 19th, 2019, I am currently in a classroom at Autodesk University showing a bunch of people in that room how to do this very same thing. And what I'm showing them is how we can take a vise that's downloaded from any manufacturer and use Fusion to turn it sort of into a smart vise. And what do I mean by smart vise? I mean that we can go to the change parameters function, and you can see in this particular case that I have the ability to change the parallel height, width, and thickness, and the stock width, depth, and thickness, and also shift the stock. So if I were to change this number to be 10, you'll see my stock gets much wider. If I set this to be 5, you'll see the vise jaws open more. If I set the thickness to 3, you'll see it gets taller. And if I offset it in the X or Y direction, I'll do 2 this way, or I'll do -2, and you'll see that the part moves around inside of the vise. And so in order to do this, we have to use a combination of parameters and using some of the direct modeling capabilities inside of Fusion to kind of get rid of some of the items we don't need, or to line things up, kind of get this vise moving the right way. And then we're going to talk about adding some joints that's going to control the motion of how all these things work. And we're going to dive into parameters a little bit, both model parameters as well as user parameters. So stay tuned. We're going to go through and work on this vise project, and soon you'll be able to make your own parametric vises. All right, so now that we know what the goal is, I've switched over to my web browser, and I've gone to kurtworkholding.com. You can choose any vise manufacturer that you want to go and visit for this. Most of these people are going to have their models available on their website, and if they don't, you should contact your salesperson, who can probably arrange to get you the models that you want. I'm going to go to the work holding products, and I'm going to choose their Ang-Lock and D-Series vises, and then the one I want is this Kurt DX6. Now, it gives me a bunch of information, but the thing that I really care about is down towards the bottom. I'm just going to click on this little CAD module thing. And I want to do a 3D, but I want this to be in step format. So I'm going to go find the step format. And then I get a couple choices here, AP203 or AP214. These are different standards. You can check them out on Wikipedia if you want to see what the differences between these two are. I always like to go with AP214 if I can. I don't want this to be zipped, so I'm going to uncheck that. I'm going to choose download, and then Kurt's website comes up and says you can drop this into SolidWorks, or if you just want to download it to your computer, click on this link, and that's what I'll do. And now I have that file downloaded to my computer, so I can switch back over into Fusion, and I'm in a new design. So to open this file up, I'm just going to go ahead and hit the File Open button, browse to my computer to my Downloads folder, and there's the file, and I'm going to choose Open. It opened in the wrong orientation compared to what Fusion is, but that's okay. We can easily manipulate this and get it set up the way we want it to be. So I'm going to use some of Fusion's built-in move tools to get this reoriented the way that I want it to be. Another thing you might notice is across the bottom of my screen is there's no history down there. So right now we're in direct editing mode, and you might be tempted to go and switch this into history mode. But a lot of these things that I'm going to do in the very beginning, the moves and the rotates and all that kind of stuff, I don't know if I necessarily want that to be tracked. So I am certainly going to turn history on in this model eventually. I'm just not going to do that right away. I'm going to use some of Fusion's built-in direct modeling tools, and then I'll use history later on. So the first thing I want to do is do a move command. I'm going to turn the move copy, otherwise found underneath the modify dropdown. And I have to decide what is it that I want to move. Right now Fusion is set to bodies, and if I look, all my bodies in this model are bodies, so that's okay. If I had components, I'd want to use components instead, but I have bodies, so that's what I'm going to choose. So I'm going to click on the first body, and I'm going to hold the shift button, and I'm going to click on the last body. And then I'm going to click in axis select, and I think the axis I'm going to want to use is going to be under the origin. It's going to be the x-axis. And now I'm just going to kind of pull this, and I'll rotate it 90 degrees and hit OK. Now I have it in the right orientation that I want. I'm going to do another move, selecting the first body and the last body while holding the shift button down. And this time I want to do it around the Z axis, so I can click on my home button. I'm trying to get this oriented how it would be in the machine table. So I'm going to do a -90 so that this is now the front of the vise matches the front of my view cube and would match the table on my machine. And I'll go ahead and hit OK. The next thing that I'm going to do is a little bit nitpicky maybe. If you note that the origin is sunk down below the face a little bit, it's not on this bottom face. So I think I'll do a point-to-point move just to get that all set up. So I'm going to do the move command one more time, clicking on the first body and the last body. And this time I'm going to do a point-to-point. So my first point is going to be the intersection of that circle right there. And the target point is going to be my 0 origin dot. And when I hit OK, it barely moved right there. But now what we would have is that you can see that the crosshairs are exactly on that bottom face of the model. I've got my orientation set and out of the way. And now I'm ready to start doing some other things in this model that I need to do before I can move forward. I want to go through and clean things up on this model a little bit. Remember, the goal is to get an accurate representation of the envelope of this assembly, not to make everything exactly perfect. So a good example is, do I really need to track these 4 screws on there? Am I really going to change these out as I'm creating my setups inside of Fusion Cam? And the answer is no. So we can use the combine command inside of Fusion to kind of combine these bodies together. So I'm going to use the combine, and the target body is going to be that non-moving jaw. And then the tool bodies are going to be these parts going across here. So I'm going to go ahead and select those, and then I'm going to hit OK. Now you'll see when I turn off that body, I got rid of everything that was associated with it. So I kind of turned that into one lump part right there. And that's going to help me have less parts that I have to deal with on this model. I'm going to come and let me isolate this. I'm going to right click on this and choose isolate. I guess I have to do it over here. Right click and choose isolate. And now I only have this particular part left. Now I'm not going to be able to combine the shaft that goes through here because the diameter is a bit bigger. But what I can just do is use Fusion's direct modeling. I'm going to click on that face and delete that off. And now I just have that part. So I'll right click and unisolate. And then now I want to have parts 4 and part 7. I guess I can isolate this again. And I'm going to turn the body 4 back on. So these are the 2 parts. I'd really like these to sort of be one. So I'm going to combine these together. So my target body is going to be this, and the tool body is going to be this, and we're going to do a join. I'll hit OK. And now those have turned into one single body. Sometimes Fusion gets a little confused here, and because the body that I originally isolated isn't gone, I can't unisolate it, so I just have to manually kind of come back and turn the light bulbs on to get that stuff taken care of. Now you could do this for as much or as little as you wanted to. You could, for instance, take these bolts and make these be part of the jaw as well. And the same thing on this backside. Maybe I'll try to do that. So I'm going to do a combine, and I'm going to say this is my target body, and my tool bodies are going to be this and this. Let's see if Fusion will let me. And I'll hit OK. And now if I go find this body and I switch that off, you can see it did. It allowed those screws to be part of that. And I can come over and do that one more time on this side. We'll say combine one more time. I'm going to choose this as my body that as the target, and the tool bodies are going to be these 2 bolts. And now we'll hit OK. And then if we check it to make sure it works out, it looks like it did. Everything is kind of going the way I want it to. Now I'm reducing the number of parts that I have in my my model here. There's a chip guard here as well, which might be a nice feature to have for actually doing the machining. But inside of the cam setups, I don't know if that's really all that necessary. So I could either combine that, or I could just come here and delete it out. Let's find that body and do it out of the browser instead. So now I got rid of that. I could have also cut it or combined it with the main body so it couldn't have moved around, but your choice of how you want to do something like that. But we've started to reduce the number of pieces that we have inside of our assembly, so we don't have so many things that we have to do joints or rigid groups to make this all work out. I think I want to do a little bit more combining now that I think about it. If we were to look at bodies 3 which is a little, and if I turn off body 2, you can see 3 better. 3, I think they call it kind of like a nut or a shuttle nut or something like that. It's the thing that allows everything to slide back and forth. And then this is the sort of the moving jaw, or the moving body, I guess. I can combine those two things together as well to make life a little bit easier. So let me isolate that part and then turn body 2 on as well to make things a little bit easier. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say combine, and this is going to be my target body, and this is going to be my tool body. It's going to be a join, and now we just got rid of one more piece. And then I'll just turn the visibility of these objects back on. So the vise still looks exactly the same as it did when we first started, but we've reduced the number of bodies significantly on here, and we still have the same quality envelope that we started with in the beginning. So now we can start to kind of position things and move them a little bit better where I would like them to be. This may be a little bit of my OCD kicking in here for this next step, but what I would like to do is position the two jaws so that they are shut together. There's no gap between them. And one of the reasons I like to do this is later on we're going to put a slider joint on, and if we have the two vise jaws set together, we can easily do a minimum of 0 and a maximum of however the vise manufacturer says that this jaw can open up. And if you use stock sizes that are smaller or bigger than what the vise can do, you'll get a warning message letting you know that there's an issue with it, which could be helpful down the road. So to get these things lined up, I'm going to use the move command. But before I move it, I want to know how far it is between these faces. So I'm going to use the measure command, and I'm just going to click on one face and then the second face. And Fusion tells me that's 9 inches. I can either remember that, or if I click on the number in the measurement, it copied it to the clipboard for me so that I don't have to type that number in. So I'm going to use the move command. I don't exactly know why this is. I'm going to use the translate. And I have to kind of translate these two components 2 times. So I'm going to click on this face, and I want to move it the direction I want to go. And then you can see I'm going to put that in the Y. I'm just going to do my Command V on a Mac, or Control V on Windows. And it's going to move that into position for me. I'm going to do that move one more time. And I'm going to grab this component. I'm going to drag it the way it needs to go. And again, I'm going to paste that number in. And I'll hit OK. And now I have my vise jaw, or my moving vise completely shut. There's no gap there anymore. So I know everything is sort of zeroed out, so that later on when I start adding my joints, I know exactly where the 0 is and the maximum opening range of this vise jaw is going to be. Not 100% necessary step here at all. In fact, you could skip this completely and let the stock take care of it. You just won't be able to set the limits quite as easy as what I'm going to show later on. So we've sort of got this thing positioned, and you can kind of see how nice it was to get those elements put into place by just using the move command. And I haven't had to use a lot of rigid groups or joints yet to get things moving the way I want them to. If you look in my browser, I have some things that are body names, and they're named body 1, 2, body 4, body 5, body 6, and body 9. Not very descriptive names. So what I'd like to do is give these things meaningful names for me before I create components from them. So I'm going to slow double click on body 1, and I'm going to call this vise body. So now we have a vise body for that part. I'm going to go to the second one. We're going to call this moving jaw. Go to the third one, and this is going to be screw assembly. Go to the next one. This is going to be fixed jaw. I'm going to go, this one is going to be called jaw plate. And then the final one is going to be called grooved jaw plate. So those all have meaningful names. Now that I've got them named, I want to start making components out of these. So I'm going to right click on vise body and say create a component from the body. And now it's added that as a component. I kind of want to do this in a logical order. So I'm going to come down to the screw assembly and maybe make that my next component. So I'm going to go ahead and create components from bodies. Moving jaw, I'll probably hold off on that a little bit. I'll do my fixed jaw next, create components from bodies. I'll do my moving jaw, create component from body. I'll do my jaw plate. Actually, let's do this groove jaw one first. and then the last one I'll do is the jaw plate. I'll create the components from the bodies. So now I have individual components in my design that I can add joints and things like that to. So I'm ready to sort of lock down the locations of these and start to make these components so that they'll move around as this vise would. Let's take a look at how we're going to go about doing that. All right, I realized I forgot a really large step along the way. It's not that big of a deal, but I haven't saved this design yet. So I went through and saved it, but what you're going to want to do is go up and click on the save button, give this a file a name, and choose where you want to save it in your project. I've got all of my sort of cleanup work done in direct editing mode, and I think I'm ready to go and capture my design history from this point out. But before I would do that, I wanted to kind of point out that if I were to click and drag on this vise body, nothing happens. I'm not dragging and moving any of the parts. So to capture history, I'm just going to right click on my top level design and choose to capture design history. And now we'll see the design history appear down at the bottom. And now if I try to drag on anything, everything is free to move wherever it wants to. And obviously I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to go ahead and revert that. And you can use as-built joints for this. We're going to use some joints for this. We could do rigid groups. I'm going to do a little combination of all of those so you can see the differences specifically between an as-built joint and a rigid joint. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make it so this vise body can't move around anymore. And I'm going to recommend that you do an as-built joint between the vise body, and then just click on the root of the origin folder, right where it says origin, and go ahead and click on that. And we want that to be a rigid joint so that it's kind of bonded and welded right into place. And go ahead and hit OK. Now I can keep moving around. Maybe I'll do a rigid group between the vise body and the shaft assembly, and I'll go ahead and hit OK. So kind of two different ways to accomplish the same thing. Neither of these things will move now. I can keep kind of working around, choosing whether I want rigid groups or as-built joints. I think I'm going to use as-built joints, and I'm going to choose an as-built joint between this jaw, this fixed jaw, and the vise body itself, and I'll hit OK. And then I can kind of keep going around. I'll do an as-built joint between the groove jaw plate and the fixed jaw. So that might have been one where if I would have done a rigid group, I could have got the vise body, the fixed jaw, and the jaw plate all in one, where I had to do that in two separate joints to get the same thing done. We'll do one more as-built joint between the moving jaw and the jaw plate, and I'll go ahead and click OK. Now nothing is moving around anymore except for maybe the one thing that I want to move, which is going to be this moving jaw assembly. You can see I can move that and drag it around anywhere I want to. Obviously I don't want it to be just drug out anywhere willy-nilly, so I'm just going to go and revert that and put it back into place before I create a joint that's going to control the motion there. So I'm going to start the joint command, and Fusion wants to know between what two components. So let me turn off the groove jaw plate just to make this a little bit easier to see. And I'm going to scooch in here, and I'm just going to grab the center dot right there on that face. So that's going to be my first selection. I can turn off that jaw plate and turn on the other jaw plate now, and I'm going to make that same selection over there. And go ahead and click on that. And now I want to see a slider. So like if I animate this, the thing that I really care about is when I see this number in this case, you see how the number is getting, it's a positive number. It's not a negative number, it's a positive. I want that number to be positive. If yours is negative, you have to select your jaws in the opposite direction that you originally chose. So I'll go ahead and choose OK. Now I go back to my home view. Let's turn my jaw plate back on. And now you'll see as I drag this back and forth, I'm able to get the motion I want, except for I can make the two bodies go through each other, and I can open this up way too much. So let's take a look at how we can kind of fix that. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go find this slider joint, and I'm going to edit the joint limits. Before I do that, I'm going to revert this back into position. Now I'm going to come back and edit the joint limits. I'm going to turn on a minimum. I'm going to set that to 0, and a maximum of how far this jaw is able to open up. So I'm just going to go ahead and say 9 inches. I don't really even know what the value is for this. I'd have to go look on the CURT website. But earlier on, when I moved these two vices together and put a 0 gap between their faces, that was the reason I wanted to do that. So the minimum would be when they're touching, and then however far these vice jaws can open up, and I'll go ahead and hit OK. Nothing really changed, but now when I drag this, I can drag it back 9 inches, and I can drag it to 0. And so the vise will open and close that way. And I'm also starting to see some visibility of joints on the screen. I can either turn off the root of the joints folder, or I could start shutting off the eyes for the different joints that I want to appear. It's not that big of a deal right now, so I think I'll leave them all on. And we'll go and learn a little bit about parameters and how we're going to make our parallels and our stock and then put them into position. Before I go any farther, I do want to make sure I revert everything so that Fusion doesn't try to capture the position. So now I'm satisfied with everything that I've sort of done with this step model. I've got it positioned, and the jaws are opening and closing. And now I want to start going and drawing some components that are going to represent the parallels and the stock. And I'm going to rely on one of the key features inside of Fusion called parameters. If you haven't used parameters yet, parameters are what makes using programs like Fusion so powerful, is that every number that you type into Fusion is being tracked by the system in some way, shape, or form. And you can always go and manipulate those numbers. So I'm going to use my FX function up here to get to the parameters. If you don't have this pinned yet, you're going to go to the Modify dropdown, and you're going to find the Change Parameters button right there. So I'm going to go choose my Change Parameters, and I'm going to make some user parameters before I even get started. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit the plus. And I'm going to call one parallel height, and it's going to be in inches, and I'll give this a height of 1.5, and then I'm just going to give a description of sets height of parallels. So the next person that needs to use this, they'll understand what this parameter does, and I'll go ahead and hit OK. So I've created this parameter. This parameter essentially does nothing so far. It's just a parameter. It's not tied to anything. It has no bearing on anything yet. Later on, we're going to make use of all of these parameters when we create our parallels and our stock. So I'm going to do another one. I'm going to call this parallel width. You can see I'm using capital letters for each of the words that start this out. You can use whatever format you want here. The important part is the parameters you're going to refer to later on are case sensitive. So if you want them to recall properly, you have to use capitals and small letters the same way that you did when you created them. And the expression for this, I'm going to call this 6, and I'll say that this sets the width of parallels. Go ahead and hit OK. And we want one more called parallel height. So there we go. We'll go parallel thickness is what this one needs to be. You saw that turned red, saving me from myself, because we have to have unique parameter names, and there's certain parameters that we can't use that the system has reserved. Like you can't call a parameter inch or in or mm or foot or whatever it might be that's reserved by the system already. I'll call this 1/8 of an inch thick, and then I'll say sets the thickness of parallels, and I'll hit OK. So now you can see that we have the comments here. I have a few more parameters to go. I'm going to call this one stock width. And we'll call this 8 inches. And I'm going to say sets stock width. And I'll hit OK. Do another one. Stock depth. I'll call this 2 inches. Sets stock depth. Go ahead and hit OK. Do another one, stock thickness. And then we'll call this 1.5. It's pretty thick, but that'll be okay. And then we'll say sets stock thickness. Now I should have probably done this as well, just to make it even more apparent. Set stock thickness We'll go to this other one and we'll say Y. And we'll come to this one right here and we'll say that this is X. So I think it'd be pretty easy for pretty much anybody that's going to come and open up this model later on to understand what these parameters do and what they're controlling. I want to do one more. I'm going to call this one X offset. And I'm going to give this an expression. I don't have to give an expression of anything. I'm just going to give it an expression of 1. And I'm going to say shifts stock left or right. And we'll go ahead and choose OK. So those are the different parameters that we're going to reference later on as we go through and do the rest of our modeling. I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. And now I can come and pretty much shut all this off for a little bit. I don't need to see any of it. I could even shut off my joint visibility here if I want to. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say new component, and I'm going to give this component a name, and I'm going to call this parallel. and go ahead and click out of there. And now I'm going to create a sketch on this front plane, and I'm going to sketch a rectangle, a center point rectangle, and I'm going to drag this out. And now instead of typing in numbers I want here, I'm going to refer to those parameters. So I'm going to call this one parallel, and see, as soon as I start typing that, it gives me choices. That's going to be my parallel width, and I'm going to hit tab, and then I'm going to call this parallel, and this is going to be my height. And now when I hit OK, it's going to go FX and FX, and it refers back to those parameter names that I created, so that it's already set to those values that I set when I created the parameter names. Go ahead and extrude this, and I'm going to call this parallel, and we'll call that parallel thickness right there. And there's my parallel that I'm going to work with. All right, so I can start to turn this stuff back on again, and then I'm going to activate the top level assembly. Now, almost always, I don't need to see my vise body here either. I can shut that off to make my life a little bit easier. Almost always, I don't want you to ever really have to deal with this capture or allow, or capture or revert, I should say. I kind of was thinking of the PC and Mac commercial, cancel or allow. But in this case, I want to make it easier on myself to get these parallels stuck in there. So I'm going to open this up. And when I do this, capture position or revert is going to pop up. I'm going to choose to capture the position here. And then later on, we're going to come back and we're going to delete that. So now what I want to do is I want to position my parallel in place by using a joint. So I'm just going to go find the midpoint right there. Let me do that again. I missed it. Little helpful tip, if you ever want to lock on to certain places, if I hold the control or the command, depending on if it's a Windows or Mac, I can lock onto those so that I can't go and shift anywhere else. And we'll just do the same thing right there and grab that spot. Now that parallel is going to move into this place. I don't want it to be a slider. I want it to be rigid. It's not going to move. And I'll go ahead and hit OK. So there's one parallel. So I'm going to right click on this parallel and say copy. And then I'm going to right click on my design name and say paste. And a second one's going to appear. Now I can kind of move this around, make it a little bit easier to grab onto. And now I'm just going to do another joint based on that point right there, mating up to that point right there. And that's going to move into place. And now I've got a set of parallels created there. So that's good. I've got my two parallels in place. Everything's good to go. All right, now I can start creating my stock component. So I'm going to come up and I can shut some of this off as well. I can leave it on, I can shut it off. I'll just shut it off to make it a little bit more viewable. I'm gonna right click and say new component, and I'm gonna slow double click on this newly formed component and call this stock. And then I'm gonna create a sketch on the top plane, and I'm gonna do a rectangle, center point rectangle, lock to the origin. And now I'm gonna use those parameters I pre-created again. So I'm gonna call this stock width and go select that. Hit the tab key, and this is going to be stock depth. There we go. So I got the size of my stock created. I'm going to finish my sketch. I'm going to extrude this and call this stock thickness. And I'll hit OK. And now I've got the thickness of my stock created as well. When I use this in my designs, I'd like this to be sort of transparent. So I'm going to expand out my bodies, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go find the opacity control. I'll set this to about 50 or 60%. It won't appear see-through until I activate the top level. So let me just go and activate this top level. Now you can see that it looks more like glass, and I can come back and turn more of these components back on. I'm going to leave that vise body off for a little bit longer. Now I'd like to position this piece of stock on my parallels. So I'm going to do that by using a joint, and I'm going to select, the first one's going to be that position right there. I'm going to roll over, I'm going to find this top face, and I'm going to hold the control or the command button down just to make my life a little bit easier to select that. And Fusion's going to use a planar joint. I want that to be a rigid joint. And I've got that located. Now, I like to drag it left to right, and that'll tell me what number it is I need to change in the numbers right here. I could also look at my work coordinate system and figure that out as well. But I'm going to call this my X offset. And that should automatically shift it over the 1 inch that we set up when we created this. We'll go back and switch that later on. We'll just go ahead and say OK there. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And now I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut off this vice jaw visibility. And I'm going to do another joint. I'm going to choose to do it between this back face right there. And then I'm going to choose it somewhere right there. I'm going to grab that point right there. And I don't want this to be a rigid. I'm going to flip it right away, and I'm going to say I want it to be a planar joint. Now when I hit OK, if everything goes well, that part should move up against where I want it to be. And if I turn that jaw back on, it should be positioned exactly where I want that to go. So now I've got my part sitting on my parallels, and everything should shift and work right now the way that I want it to. So I'm going to turn my vise body back on. And now I'm going to go back to my parameters, and let's see if I can manipulate this around a little bit easier so we can make it easier to see. So that should be pretty close to working right there. Shift this down a little bit more. Okay, good. I'll move this off. Well, I'll put the vise on the right and the part on the left. So now you can see if I were to look at this from the side and I change this to be 1.625, the parallels get higher and the stock shifts along with it. If I shift this over, I could change my parallel width to 7. It should get wider than the vise jaws. If I change it to 4, it should get shorter than the vise jaws. Good. So let's shift that back to 6 where I want it to be. If I change the thickness, I'll say 0.05, it should get a lot thinner. And if I go back to 0.125, it should get back to the thickness I had it at. So that looks to be working okay. I'll set my stock thickness to be 10. That shifts the right way. If I go to 4, that shifts the right way. Okay. So let's click that back to 8. If I change this to be 5, it should open up. If I change it to be 0.25, it should close the vise jaws down quite a bit. So let's set that back to about 2. And then I'll change the thickness to 0.5. That looks good. Change it to 1. Maybe I'll just leave it right there. And here's that shift. So if I set it to 0, it should now be able to look at it from a front top view. So there you can see it's exactly centered. If I put a positive number in, it should go to the right. If I do a negative number, it should go back to the left. So I pretty much have complete control of where my stock is positioned in my vise now. And I'm pretty happy with how everything is working. So there's the steps that you can take to use parameters and some built-in modeling functions inside of Fusion to get your vise set up. So let's take a look at one more thing about how you might use this in a future design. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then we'll see how we're going to do that. So you might think the way that we use this vise is to bring the part into the vise, but that's the wrong way to think about this. We're going to bring the vise into the part is how we're going to do it. So I'm going to go to this untitled file folder. I guess I can just shut it down. Let me open this up, and inside here I'm going to have a part in here called hub, and I'm going to choose to open this. And this is a part that I got it from the Autodesk Cam Samples directory, and then I just want to take this and either ground it, or as you can see, I've got an as-built joint placed on it, and I'm ready to now bring that vise in. So the one we've been working on is this YouTube one. I'm going to right-click on that and say Insert in a Current Design, and we'll let Fusion just sort of go ahead and place that. I'm going to drag this around a little bit, and I'm going to hit OK, and now I can close my data panel out. And we're going to go back to that vise. I realized I forgot one more little step, not the end of the world, but we're going to go back there and fix that. So there's the part that I need to work with. It looks like it's definitely got to be opened up a bit more. If you wanted to find the exact size of this, I could switch over to the manufacturer tab really quick and just say, here's a easy way you could do this. I could say I want to use this as the thing that I want to machine. Sorry, let me do that one more time. New setup. The model is going to be this part. And now when I go to my stock, if I choose a fixed size box for me, I can see that I'm going to need something about 3 by 3 by 3/4. So if I did maybe 3 1/4 by 3 1/4 or 3 1/8 by 3 1/8 by 1, that should be a pretty good size for me. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel on that setup, and I'm going to go back to my design tab. Now, right now this is linked. You see the little link symbol up here there. I'm going to right click on that and choose to break the link, and now my parameters are going to become available to me. So I can come over here and I can say, all right, my parallel height and all those things for right now is good. Let's call this 3 inches. Let's call this 3 inches. The 1 inch that I wanted, I don't want it to be offset in the vise at all. I can go ahead and hit OK. And now that part, that should fit in that stock pretty well. I'm going to assemble the stock to the part. So I'm going to do a joint between the top face right there. And then I'm going to hover my mouse over this top face, hold my control or command button down until I get that. And then I'm going to look at this from the side. I don't want that to be a planar. I want that to be, we'll do a rigid joint. I'm going to flip it. And then I can raise this up or down. I'm gonna raise it up a little bit so I see which field it is I have to change. It's the Z. And I'm going to do like maybe 20 thousandths of an inch that I want to face off, and I'll hit OK. And now my part is positioned in the stock and it's in the vice jaws. So it was pretty simple and easy to get that thing positioned this way. Some parts will fight you a little bit more if they're not symmetric like this and they don't have a good symmetrical point to insert them into the stock like that. But you can see it's pretty simple to get this part in there and have a look at it. Now I could look at it and say like, well, that should be enough. I'm above my vice jaws with plenty clearance. I could do this as a carrier style part. Everything should be good to go with that. All right, so let's go back. Let me close this out. Let's go back. And what was the one step I forgot to do here? Remember, I had that capture position. These capture positions can be problematic. I wouldn't so much worry about one capture position. It's when you get a lot of capture positions in your design that Fusion starts to slow down. So I'm just going to right click on this capture position now, if it'll allow me to. And it's being a little difficult. So let's see if I can switch windows and come back to it. There we go. And now I can just say delete. Because the joints are there, it can't move around. Everything is good. And so I've just got rid of that capture position. And now I've got a functional vise that I can use over and over and over again on my programming. And I don't have to do any mental gymnastics to figure out if I'm going to be close to my vice jaws or what kind of stock I need to be and how far above the vice jaw I'm going to be. I can just assemble my part into the stock. It's pretty quick and painless to do it from this point on. And I can get a more accurate setup to have more confidence when I get out to the machine that I'm not going to run anything that I don't want to. So I hope you guys found this one super helpful. If it works out for you, I'd love to hear about it. If it doesn't work out for you, I'd love to hear about that as well. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you want to email me about this, you can send me an email to info@mechanicaladvantage.com, and I'll try to reply back to you as fast as I can. We can see if we can get you started out. But if you liked the video, give it a like. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. If you thought it was great, I'd appreciate a subscription. So thanks for watching, and everybody have a good day.